Hello and welcome to NB Drives. My name is Nishmanya and today's video is going to be covering road trips, especially as road trip season as we know it in India is just about to start. These are the colder months of the year which make it a little more pleasant for us to travel across the country, and that's basically from late October, November till Feb, March next year. So, as I've done a very long road trip earlier in this year, the Golden Quadrilateral, I drove it solo. You can watch the playlist, it was called the Atal Yatra, up in the pop up section on the top left or in the description below. I'm going to share all the information and tips that I gathered traveling the entire quadrilateral, which was over 6,000 kilometers solo, and I'll do it in sections. The first section I'm covering is Bombay to Delhi, and it can also be looked at vice versa, Delhi to Bombay, if you're planning a road trip on your own or with your family. Before we get into the video, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button down below and maybe consider subscribing while you're at it, as it really helps a small channel like mine out. And I promise there's a lot more road trip related content headed your way in the next few weeks, so do stay tuned for that. Now, there are two main routes that you can take when you're going from Bombay to Delhi or Delhi to Bombay. First is the newly opened and fairly popular Mumbai Delhi Expressway, which is going to be most people's first choice. It spans about 1380 kilometers, and the supposed driving time, completely uninterrupted, supposed to be somewhere around 26 hours. However, I will be walking you through the more traditional route which falls under the Golden Quadrilateral. This is the NH48 route. This spans about 1450 odd kilometers, and it's supposed to take about 34 hours, 32 to 34 hours of driving time. I will break down how much time it took me and how I planned my route driving solo. Since I was driving solo and I had a very long 15-day trip ahead of me, I decided that I'd split my drive into 550 kilometer stretches. That meant I'd get from Bombay to Delhi in about 3 days. And my first day's trip was getting from Bombay to Ahmedabad. In order to prevent fatigue over the long drive, I made sure that I was stopping every 2 hours to stretch my legs and get a break from driving, as well as setting 3 major points over the course of the drive where I could take a break even if I don't remember the 2 hour mark exactly. And on this section of the drive, it was stopping at Vapi, then Bharuch and Vadodara before getting to Ahmedabad. The logistics of this trip had me make an Excel sheet with the help of my family, planning the stops, the distances that I'd cover, and the estimated time for me to get from point to point. My drive started early in the morning around 7 am from Nariman Point in Mumbai, and I took the Sea Link out where I caught a very beautiful sunrise and had relatively free roads all the way up until the outskirts of Mumbai where I caught a little bit of traffic. And then again, I got a very long section, roughly 20-25 kilometers of traffic because of new roadworks being done on the outskirts of Maharashtra just before the border to Gujarat. Besides these two slowdowns, because of the early-ish start and the relatively good roads, I managed to do very good time on the whole, and I got not too busy highway sections as well. That meant my average speed was pretty decent, and I ended up covering my 550 kilometer journey in roughly 11 hours, and that's with my breaks for breakfast and lunch. So the actual driving time would have been closer to 9.5 hours. I will note that I did get traffic entering Ahmedabad as the roads were quite crowded, considering I had reached just in peak traffic hour around 5 o'clock in the evening, 5-6 o'clock, and that did mean that it took me a little extra time to get to my hotel. I wanted to keep the driving time on day 3 relatively short, so I ended up doing a longer stretch on day 2 and aimed to go from Ahmedabad all the way to Ajmer. And my main stops were Keshawar, Nathdwara and Bhilwara on the way to Ajmer. And this meant that I'd end up driving about 560 odd kilometers in theory, but the actual kilometer count was closer to 580 kilometers given all the little deviations and things I had. My early start meant I got out of Ahmedabad completely traffic free and stress free. That meant I got to the highway and got to enjoy the relatively clear roads for the early morning hours. I ended up spending nearly 12 hours, just shy at 11 and a half hours on the road on this day, and that included my lunch stop and my breakfast stop. So, again, realistic driving time would have been closer to 9.5, 10 hours. Honestly, majority of the driving on the second day was actually very good. The highways were clear, well maintained, and I could keep really good average speeds up. The only time I actually had a little bit of a slowdown was when I turned off towards Bhilwara, which had me go on to a small section of state highway just before I reached the city where my lunch stop was planned. And that ended up costing me about half an hour, 45 minutes, but it wasn't too bad. I could get straight back on NH48. And after that, it was business as usual all the way up till a few kilometers before Ajmer, where I had to turn off NH48 again to make the entry towards the city. This entry was actually quite an interesting route. I don't think this was the main road towards Ajmer, but the stretches that I found had some kacha rasta and had a winding road up through hills, relatively narrow. And I think anyone in slightly lower slung sedans or hatchbacks would be a little concerned with these roads, but it wasn't too bad. And the entry, as you can see in these clips, was actually relatively enjoyable in a SUV, I will say that. And I made it to Ajmer around 5 o'clock in the evening, and I got to see the beautiful lake before I made my way to the hotel. The third day of driving was the easiest for me as I had to cover just shy of 400 kilometers and the roads were supposedly very good on the way. My main halting points on the second day were just outside Jaipur, then around Neemrana, and then to New Delhi straight. And these were about 130 to 150 kilometers apart, so again, relatively evenly spaced out. I actually ended up covering the distance in really good time. I took a total of about 7.5 hours to get from Ajmer to Delhi, and that was including one stop for my breakfast. And while the early start helped me get out of Ajmer hassle free, this did mean that when I was reaching Delhi and especially crossing the Gurgaon area, I did end up getting a lot of traffic on the way into New Delhi. This was because I was reaching around 12 o'clock at noon. This extra traffic meant that my arrival to the hotel in central Delhi, not far from India Gate, this was the Ambassador Hotel, ended up being closer to around 1:30 in the afternoon. I would have ended up saving at least half an hour if I didn't have the traffic, but that's just how it plays out when you're on long road trips. Now, apart from your stay and food, the next major expenditure that you'll be looking at is your fuel bills. If you have a large diesel powered SUV, you can expect it to give you between 12 and 14 kpl out on the highway. And if you have a petrol car smaller, you can probably expect about 15, 16. So if you were to budget for fuel, I would recommend putting aside about 11, 12,000 rupees in just fuel costs. I ended up spending closer to 10,000 on this section of my drive. But considering that there will be variations in your driving styles and road conditions you're going to face, it's probably safe to build in that little margin. For petrol cars, I'd recommend putting aside about 13.5 to 15,000 rupees depending on the kind of car you have and of course your driving style. Another cost that you're going to want to know is the amount of toll tax you're going to pay over the course of this drive. Now, I averaged it out, and for the Bombay Delhi section of my drive, I ended up spending about 4,000 rupees in tolls, just under, when I was traveling on the NH48 route. I do believe that the cost on the new expressway is a little higher, so maybe budget for 6,500 rupees there. Here are a few things you should have in your car regardless of whether you're going for a long road trip or a short one. But considering that this is going to be a relatively long one and you'll most likely be traveling with family, a few things you should definitely have are jumper cables. You should have a tire repair kit. You should have some sort of extra water and food in your car for your family in case you get stranded on the highway side. And I would also recommend carrying maybe a solar powered torch in your car if you do break down in the dark hours of the evening or early hours of the morning. I also strongly believe in having a dash cam. If you can get a front and rear dash cam, it's great. But at the very least, fit a front dash cam considering how our highways are and how our traffic behaves. It's always good to have it. If you do ever get into an incident, you will have video proof showing your side of the story. I hope you guys found this video informative, and I really hope it helps you out in planning a road trip. And I do really want to stress the point that a drive like this can very well be undertaken solo, as I have shown earlier in the year. So do not let that scare you off thinking that the distances are fairly long and you don't have a second driver to help you out. It does not matter. You will make some really good memories, and you can pick any of the spots on this route as I've broken it up, and maybe plan a shorter drive 2 days from wherever you're going. You can get to some really interesting places, and it'll make for a great family trip or a solo adventure or even a nice group outing with your friends. I highly recommend you guys hit the road this road trip season and watch this space. There's more road trip content coming very soon. I'd also love to know if you've done this road trip more recently than I have, and what your experience has been down in the comment section below. And if you've used the new Delhi-Mumbai expressway and whether that has actually been faster for you or not. I'm eager to try it out myself. Also, let the community know any of your road trip related tips and tricks down in the comments below. I'm sure they'll really appreciate it, and I'll also really appreciate going through it, as it's gonna help me in the future. Until next time, cheers.